This is the sustainability lecture for Module 2. Now, prior to watching this lecture, you should have looked at the Module 2 learning objectives. We will also go through those learning objectives during this lecture. Keep moving this toolbar around, so I apologize for that. So here are the learning objectives for the sustainability module. I want you to be able to identify the three components of sustainability, which would be social, economic, and environmental. I also would like you to describe the three components, like what is actually included in social, economic, and environmental sustainability, and also discuss how these work together. So let's start with the types of sustainability. So like I said, you're going to identify these three primary components of sustainability. So here is a short video that I posted in the PowerPoint. I'm not going to go over the video now, but I urge you to watch this as you go through the lecture. Now, keep in mind that you have to be in the slideshow mode in order to play these videos and look at the links that I put within the PowerPoint. So my first question, and a lot of times I write questions on these PowerPoints to guide you as to what you need to know. So my first question is, what is the definition of sustainability? Now, there is a web page that I linked in this module that provides a very good definition of sustainability. But essentially what it is making sure that we can meet our basic needs in society without making it difficult for future generations to meet their needs. So basically what this is saying is we need to be able to provide goods to society, but we shouldn't destroy the environment to such an extent that our kids and our grandkids cannot meet their basic needs. So as I mentioned before, there are three types of sustainability: social sustainability, economic, and environmental. Now, what this is showing you in this slide, this actually is looking a little bit at the interactions between these three types of sustainability. We can also call this the sphere of sustainability. But the reason that I put this image on here is because it shows you what is included in these types of sustainability. So let's take a look here. Hopefully you can see my cursor on the screen, but we have social sustainability, which that has to do with poverty, and we call that environmental equity. There is also cultural needs that fall into this realm, and empowerment, meaning that people or groups of people can advocate for themselves. Now, economic sustainability looks at businesses, right? So stability in the businesses, but also efficiency. And a third part of that is how goods are produced. It doesn't necessarily say that in this image, but that is part of economic sustainability. Now, environmental sustainability has to do with how we use our natural resources, how we use our natural resources, the types of pollution that are emitted into the environment, but also our conservation of biodiversity, or the wealth of animals and plants and bacteria and all kinds of living organisms in our environment. So let's take a closer look at these concepts. So this is social sustainability. I see here, I cut some of my words off. So this includes the preservation of social capital, meaning like the things that we provide for different groups of people. So the preservation of social capital by investing in services that create the foundation of our society. So let's look a little bit closer at what type of services fall under social sustainability. Now, you do not have to read all the details of this image. I selected it because it gives you basic categories. So we have here on the bottom, space to grow, right? And this refers to like housing and infrastructure, which means businesses such as grocery stores. So I lived in Oakland, California for quite a few years, and Oakland is considered an economically depressed area that is primarily African-American and Hispanic communities. Now, the thing about Oakland is this is a pretty big city, right? But all the businesses have left this area because of high crime, but also because of poverty. People could not purchase those goods. Now, when I lived in Oakland, there was one grocery store for the entire city. The grocery store was not well stocked, and you have to think of it, say you're a mother, a single mother, and you have several children, but you have no transportation, because this was a very common scenario in Oakland. So you take the bus with your children, you get to the grocery store, you get your groceries, you carry them back on the bus and get home. Now, keep in mind that bus rides are actually quite long with all the stops. So what people end up doing is going to these corner liquor stores and getting whatever food items or necessities may be stocked at these liquor stores. So this is an example of a lack of infrastructure in a economically depressed area. And this falls under social sustainability. Now, here we have voice and influence. So when people in these areas organize, right, they get a grassroots organization to advocate for themselves, do they have any influence? Are people listening? Is there a social and cultural life? Are there community centers? Are there places for kids to go and have after school activities? And finally, we look at this top area here, amenities and social infrastructure. Are there good schools? So again, my experience in Oakland, I spent a little bit of time teaching middle school students science. So it was an outreach program where I was going to school for my graduate work. Now, when I went into these schools, they do not have textbooks for the kids to take home. In fact, they don't even have textbooks for all of the kids, right? The teachers have huge classes. I'm talking 35, 40 students. And then there are no special education services at these schools. Many of these kids have ADHD or learning issues that are never addressed. And so the consequence is a very high dropout rate. So this is an example of a lack of infrastructure or amenities in a community. So all of these fall under social sustainability. So with my question here, what types of services would this include? You look at this image I put on the slide. And when we talk about social equity, equity means equal, right? So are all of these communities on equal footing? Do all of these communities have good schools, have businesses, have grocery stores, have good transportation? That is what we call social equity. So I want you to think about the area that we live in. Are parts of Phoenix equitable to, say, Scottsdale? Now, my parents live in Scottsdale, so I can absolutely guarantee you that they are not equitable. So let's move on to economic sustainability. So here is a quote from the UK government. This was in 2001, so it's a bit dated, but I like this quote. Maintaining high and stable levels of economic growth is one of the key objectives of sustainable development. Now, this falls under economic sustainability. Abandoning economic growth is not an option, but sustainable development is more than just economic growth. The quality of growth matters as well as the quantity. So economic sustainability, if we look back to our previous image here, where it encompasses stability, efficiency, growth, that refers a lot to businesses. So let's face it, right? Businesses are in it to make money. So a lot of businesses will produce their goods at the lowest price possible. Well, this leads to pollution, either chemical pollution, but also pollution in terms of packaging, for instance, plastics, right? I got my niece a Barbie for her birthday. She's 4 years old. And the packaging for this toy is just unbelievable. Plastic on plastic on plastic, ties all over the Barbie. You know, if someone wanted to shop with that Barbie, they're going to have a hard time getting it out of the package and taking it out of the store. I guess that's the goal, right? But think about all that plastic pollution, which is a huge issue right now. So economic sustainability refers to businesses cleaning up, right? Being efficient yet environmentally friendly. But it also refers to sustainable growth in the sense that as we add to communities, as we build things, are we building them in a way that is environmentally friendly? Are we building them in a way that makes this infrastructure available to all communities? So I live in Central Phoenix, and there is so much development right now, condos, condos, condos. I looked into some of these condos and I swear they are going for $900,000. Is that economic sustainability? I would say no. And you go into economically depressed areas and the housing is really subpar. It is not quality housing. So this is economic sustainability. So traditional economic policies do not include the environmental damage that is caused by the production of goods. Now, this is called externalized cost. External meaning outside, right? Internal would be inside, external outside. So externalized costs mean that, let's say paper production, right? The manufacturing of paper emits huge, huge amounts of chlorine and pollutants. So all of these manufacturing centers for paper are located along rivers, well, most of them, and they dump that chlorine and those pollutants into the river. So the externalized cost would be the money that has to be spent to clean up that river. So when we buy these really cheap goods from, say, Target, Walmart, wherever, and a lot of them, let's face it, are made in China. When the goods are really cheap like that, they are not paying for externalized costs. They are not paying to clean up the pollution or, say, the garbage that producing those goods has created, or even disposal of the goods. If you think of like your cell phones and your computers, right? We have to buy new cell phones every few years, or a lot of us do, because iPhones, Samsung, they stop working well after a few years, which many have claimed these companies program into the phones, and I believe that's true, right? But that is electronic waste. Are these companies paying to recycle that waste, or are they just filling up our landfills? So I put a link on this page. I urge you to go to this page when you're reviewing the PowerPoint. This page talks about externalized costs. It gives you really good examples and breaks down the concept for you. Now we have environmental sustainability. So we talked about social sustainability, which looks at like infrastructure, access to food, things like that. We looked at economic sustainability, which refers to primarily businesses and sustainable development, sustainable production. Now we are looking at environmental sustainability. So this has to do with what we call natural capital. So again, I put a link here which displays natural capital quite well. Now I'm actually going to click on this link and take us to that page. So I'm going to have to share a new screen with you. Now again, hold on here. Okay, hopefully you can see my web page. Again, to see these links, to click on them, you really should be in slideshow mode on the PowerPoint. So 6 types of natural capital. So natural capital refers to services or goods that are provided by a healthy environment. So let's look at this. Soil. Okay, we need it to grow plants. It also sustains a very, very diverse community of bacteria and things like earthworms, things that break down plant matter, right? So that is a service that is provided by the environment. You need healthy soil, a very good bacterial community in order to grow food. Now, many, many of our crops in this country and around the world have depleted the soil. However, with human population growth, we are going to need to increase food production. So we need to maintain the health of the soil. Okay, the atmosphere, for instance, warms the earth. We absolutely need greenhouse gases to keep the earth warm, right? Because they trap in some heat. However, we are increasing the amount of greenhouse gases to such an extent that it is warming the earth to levels that we have not seen. Water, obviously, water provides life, right? We all need water. Now, organisms. Let's think about organisms as natural capital. So I study pollinators in my research, primarily bees. They are the best pollinators. Pollination is what we call an ecosystem service. It is something we need that is provided by bees and butterflies, bats, few beetles, right? These are all living organisms. You need a diversity and large communities of these organisms in order to get pollination, which is what produces like 30% of all the food we eat. Okay, so if you go down here to this table, okay, this tells you about the world stock of natural resources and the concepts that are related to this. You can click on any of these to learn more about these concepts. Okay, I didn't really use this table here, but you can also click on that. So as I said with the other webpage, you do not have to read this like word for word in huge detail. But if you need a reference, I recommend these web pages. I did not find a very good textbook chapter for sustainability. I have one, but it also includes geologic history and it really goes into that. So you do not need to know that. So you're going to skim down to where it talks about sustainability. But I provided these websites because they are straightforward, easy to read, and quick. So you can rely on these for this module. Okay, we are going to return to the PowerPoint. I think we are, there it is. Okay, so again, I put a video, which I urge you to watch. It's really interesting. I always pick short videos, well, for the most part. This is a little blurry, but I like it anyway. So this is an image that explains natural capital a little more in depth. So here we have sources on the left-hand side of the image. Okay, they are part of the environment that we use to get like materials, right? Living organisms, pollination, things like that, raw materials. You could also look at like wood from forest, right? We need that wood because we make everything out of wood. Or think about, and this is interesting, think about sand, right? Sand is what we use to make cement. We are actually facing a shortage of sand. Like, how could that happen, right? We've depleted our supplies of sand to such an extent that it is super, super expensive to travel to the areas where there is sand remaining. So weird. Whoever thought we'd run out of sand, but we are. Now, the raw materials go into the economy to make products. Now, it says here products and money flow between production and consumption, right? We consume the products, we pay the companies. Okay, so production is the companies, consumption is us. Now, after we consume goods from natural capital, we have waste products. Now, those are the sinks in this cycle. So one of those would be landfills. Now, again, we are running out of space for landfills. We don't know where to send our garbage anymore. China used to take a lot of our garbage and they would recycle what they could and make money off of it. But China said no more. We have too much garbage and they have enough of their own. So what are we going to do with it all? Now, one encouraging thing from all of this is that there are people working on these issues every day. Scientists are working on ways to degrade plastics with bacteria. Okay, we're working on these issues, but that takes money and education. And I don't mean education like going to school. I mean education as to why these things are necessary. Now, your final learning objective is to determine how these three parts of sustainability fit together. So it's just a reminder, we have social sustainability, which refers to infrastructure, schools, grocery stores, equity, right? We have economic sustainability, and that refers primarily to businesses and production of goods. Are they doing it in an environmentally friendly manner? Are businesses producing goods in a way that will allow future generations to produce those goods as well? Or are we depleting things? Are we destroying the environment to such an extent that our future generations will not be able to produce goods? And then finally, we have, this says ecological, it's environmental, whatever, and that refers to our use of natural capital, our use of what I call environmental services, right? Like pollination, when water percolates through healthy soil, it takes out chemicals, things like that. Now, how do these interact with one another? Now, again, I gave you another website which really explains this well. It has analogies for you to kind of help you picture how these things work together. And this image that you see here is on that website, and it explains what they mean by bearable, sustainable, viable. So we're going to go there in just a second. Here's my analogy. So if we think of sustainability as a roof of a building, it protects all of the occupants and things inside the building, right? You can think of what they call three pillars of sustainability. So you think of like a, I don't know, circular structure that holds up the roof, right? So we have the three pillars of sustainability. So if any one of those pillars is removed, the roof is unstable and things get destroyed. So let's take a look at this website. Let's see here. You should be able to see this. Now, I showed you that image, right, where it has all of the circles interacting. That's called a Venn diagram. You don't have to know that name, but if you ever have heard of it, that's what it is. So let's take a look at this. Environmental and economic sustainability combine to make living conditions viable. Okay, that means like have a certain standard of living. Now, social unrest can overwhelm this environmental and economic sustainability. So think about the Black Lives Matter movement, and however you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement is kind of aside from the point that I'm going to make. So a lot of people who were protesting during that time, right, it's because they don't have environmental and economic sustainability. Their quality of life tends to be lower than other communities. And whether that be through policing or whatever, that is really what was underlying that movement, in my opinion. And you can disagree with me. Now, environmental and social sustainability work together to make everyone's living conditions bearable. Okay, so we have viable, which means actually viable means we have the goods that we need to live, right? Bearable means that people can have a decent standard of living, right? It's bearable. We can get by. We have our basic needs met. Now, until we run out of money. Think about, for instance, the pandemic that really affected environmental and social sustainability, right? Primarily like social sustainability because people lost their jobs, they ran out of money, they couldn't pay for their rent or basic needs, right? So when one of those things falls apart, when we run out of money, the conditions are no longer bearable. Now, economic and social sustainability have to do with making living conditions equitable. Do people in one community have the same standard of living, the same goods and services as people in another community? Now, this says that when the environment degrades to where Earth can't sustain human life, this falls apart. Now, think about in some countries, and actually, even in this country, we are running out of water. Water is going to be the source of future wars, if you ask me. There's a place in South Africa, a pretty good sized city that ran out of water. They had to ship water in, go get water from a neighboring city in plastic bottles. They had no more water. They had depleted the water that is in the ground and had depleted the bodies of water that supplied their area with this good, right? So what we want to avoid here is environmental degradation, the breakdown of the environment to such an extent that people cannot meet their needs, that people in some areas can't grow food, can't have drinking water. Okay, that is an inequitable situation. Now, sustainable living requires that all three of these types of sustainability are met. So let's go back to PowerPoint. Now, I asked you the question, how do social, economic, and environmental sustainability interact with one another? So I'm going to want you to go back to this web page to reinforce this. They give the analogy of the house that I talked about, but they also give a tree analogy, which explains this really well. But I really want you to know that first part on that web page that we just went over. If social sustainability breaks down, what happens? So if social sustainability breaks down, so you see here in the diagram, it says social. When it interacts with ecological, you get bearable, interacts with economic, you get equitable, and all three, you get sustainable. But if social sustainability breaks down, those things are no longer there. Life is unbearable. There is no equity. Life is not sustainable. So you need to think about what happens when one of these types of sustainability is no longer there. That's what I mean about the interaction of these three types of sustainability. So just to review your learning objectives, the first one is you need to know what each of these types of sustainability are. Like, what do they include? Social, ecological, or environmental, and economic. What do those mean? Then you need to know this diagram and that web page as to how these interact. What happens when one type of sustainability fails, or even two types, right? So those are your learning objectives for this module.